What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're going to be rating some of your first FPL drafts. There were over 1,200 replies to my tweet on Twitter asking for you to send some of your drafts in. We will do another one of these videos in a couple of weeks once we've had some pre-season information, maybe more transfers and stuff like that as well, because obviously I can't go through all 1,200, but I have gone through a bunch of the numbers and the data just to see how many of the popular picks are in each team as well. So thank you very much to everyone that submitted. Sorry I couldn't get to absolutely everyone, but I will do this again in a couple of weeks. If you do enjoy these types of videos, make sure to give them a like and hit that subscribe button if you are new around here, and let's jump into it. So just before we jump into the drafts themselves, I just wanted to talk about some of the numbers. So I manually went through about 100 teams just to get a good overview of who the popular players were. Obviously at this time, right, it's pre-season, so we can go and check the overall ownership numbers, but it's actually quite different in some cases compared to what active and engaged managers who are maybe tinkering with their team, they're trying to set up how their structure looks, formations and stuff like that. So Trent Alexander-Arnold, for example, is about 56% owned overall, but for all the people that replied to me, the 100 teams that I went through, he was closer to 96 or 97% ownership. So it's incredibly high, and I think his price shows that, because 7.5 is just too cheap. Haaland, again, is about 64% ownership overall, but he's closer to 75% in the teams that I checked. Jesus also very popular, only just behind Haaland in terms of overall picks, and Salah was about 90%, so not quite as popular as Trent. Obviously he's 13 million, so some people are trying to see if they can go without him, but still extremely popular. I also went through the £8 million midfielder ownership, so I didn't count how often a team had an £8 million midfielder. It was just how often they appeared, like individually. So Diaz is by far the most popular £8 million pick so far, over 50% owned in all the teams that I went through. I don't think he's necessarily a bad pick right now. Again, we're doing this quite early on. That's why I want to do another video in a couple of weeks. Pre-season will change our minds. I just can't help but feel that Robertson is a better option for $1 million less than Diaz. And obviously once you go for him, and considering most people have got Trent and nearly everyone's got Salah as well, there's only one more spot. So Diaz does lock you out of Robertson, who I think might be a better option. But potentially if Diaz is going to get a bunch of minutes at the start of the season, he is really good. And instead of Robertson, you could go for Cancelo if you had £7 million in defence. So I don't think it's a bad pick at all. I do think some of the other players on this pick are more guaranteed minutes. Saka, for example, and Arsenal's opening fixtures aren't bad at all, especially in the kind of first 4 to 5 weeks. So he was second most popular. I was really surprised that Foden was the third most popular. It did get kind of close then. Kulusevski was just behind him. Then it was Mahrez. Mason Mount and Maddison, the least popular. With Maddison, I'm sure that's just a fixtures thing. Leicester's opening fixtures aren't great. I feel like Mount should be higher up though. I know there's a lot of talk about how, you know, Jesus has gone now, Sterling's going as well, Mahrez is going to have that right-hand spot just locked down. But if you think that Grealish is going to be on the left, Foden has to play somewhere as well. So unless Pep is going to start playing him as an 8 more often, he's probably going to take one of those wide spots. So either Grealish or Mahrez is going to miss out week to week. And I know Foden played a lot on the left or centrally, you know, in that number 9 position last season, but he can play off the right as well. I think he's that versatile. And we know that Pep doesn't mind putting players in different positions. So I do like Mahrez if he's going to get regular minutes. And obviously I love Foden as well. You know that from last year. But I'm surprised that Mason Mount is so much lower than them. The only thing with Chelsea's opening fixtures, a lot of them are away. But overall, the teams they're facing are pretty good. So I feel like Mason Mount should be a bit higher. And Kulusevski is going to be great as long as he keeps getting regular minutes like he did last season. I think what we want to see in pre-season, and again, we'll revisit this in a few weeks, is where Richarlison fits in. You know, is he going to play? Is he just going to be a backup to Son and Kane like a lot of us think? Or is he going to take some minutes off Kulusevski? Is Conte going to try him out on that right side? I know for the opening game of the season, Richarlison is banned, right, suspended for that one game, but he could come in game week 2 or 3 and start taking minutes off Kulusevski. So I think if all these players were absolutely nailed on, then fair enough, Diaz. I think Foden and Mahrez are great picks, but it's not the case. So I think Saka's ownership is fair. Mount should probably be a little bit higher, but that's how people are thinking right now. Diaz is a very, very popular pick as it stands. And then this was premium defender ownership. So this was the every team I went through is how many defenders, 5.5 million or more, they had in their team. So 3 and 4 of those kind of priced defenders was definitely the most popular. Not a huge amount of people had 5 of them, so the likes of kind of Trent, Robertson and Perisic and James and Chilwell, maybe adding in a few Cancelos. It is worth noting that not all these teams were necessarily 3 or 4 at the back. Some of them were still 5 at the back, but they didn't have 5.5 million defenders or more. Some of them had like Tomiyasu in there, or maybe a Trippier or a Cash or someone like that as well. But they're very popular. I think there wasn't many teams that went for less than 3 of them, and there's no teams I went through that had 0 or 1. So they are extremely popular this year, and I think we are going to see a lot of 4 and 5 at the back formations. Okay, so as always with these videos, I have picked some different drafts, right? There's no point in talking through the template team for 4 to 5 different teams, right? My opinion is not going to change. I obviously do have my opinion around certain players, so this is a no Salah draft. You know I love him, right? He would be in my team, but the aim is not to convert everybody to my way of thinking. I'm just going to try and go through the pros and cons for each different draft, right? So this is no Salah. The one kind of premium attacker that's in there is Harry Kane. And I don't think that's a bad shout at all. Right? I am probably going to start with Haaland, like a lot of people will. But I'm fully aware that in that first game against Southampton at home, Son and Kane could absolutely smash it. I think Southampton's defence was poor last year. I do really think that Conte getting a full pre-season with Spurs is going to be huge. There's already kind of training ground pictures coming out and tweets and stuff like that about how brutal the training is already. So it's not just him getting his way of playing with all the new players and stuff that they've brought, is also getting them up to the fitness levels that he expects from his type of team. So Spurs, I really do expect to hit the ground running. So Kane captain against Southampton at home is a good rival to Salah against Fulham away. I would still back Salah, but I don't think the gap is that big. I guess the one thing for this team is what do you do in game week 2, right? So if I just come over to the FPL screen, ignore the draft that's on screen because I've been playing around with that. So in game week 2, you got no Salah and you got no Man City against Bournemouth, at least no attackers either. And Kane has got Chelsea away. So potentially you could book in that transfer to go to Haaland in game week 2. But if anything else crops up, then you're then potentially taking hits. If Kane has smashed it in game week 1, that won't matter. I'm just not sure it's worth starting with Kane if you're automatically just going to straight away switch to Haaland and then still not have Salah to kind of rely on as well. And you could look at it and say, well, I've got Luis Diaz, so every time Salah has a good fixture, so does he. But I'm not convinced we can rely on him for decent minutes like Salah will get. I don't know, if I had to say right now, without seeing too much pre-season for Liverpool, I do expect Diaz to start the season and get quite a few minutes, right, in that kind of Mane role, right, on the left. Now Mane is gone, but I don't think we can fully trust him like we can with Salah, and that is the problem when you only have one premium player. Even if you don't go with Salah, right, you could have Kane and Haaland or Son and Haaland. At least you can switch around when one of those players has a bad fixture. And I think the main problem with Spurs is just that game week 2 against Chelsea away. You need to switch or have another option. And while everyone is looking at kind of Haaland against Bournemouth, maybe going with Salah against Palace, you're then trying to pick one of your defenders, possibly like Cancelo against Bournemouth at home, might not be that bad, or one of those other attackers which are really good, but I'm not sure they can necessarily be trusted week in, week out with the armband. So that's all I'd worry about. Not even not having Salah, just only having one premium. The big plus of a team like this is you get an incredible defence, right? You got pretty much all the best defenders you can ask for. Whether Chilwell is better than James, we'll have to wait and see. But having Trent and Robertson and Cancelo, they're obviously top of their game. Cancelo should play no matter who else comes into the team, I would imagine. Reece James, I think, is really good, and I love Perisic as well. And you've got that double Man City defence with Ederson in there. And obviously in midfield and up front, I really like Jesus as an option, by the way. You are making use of those kind of £8 million midfielders where there should be quite a lot of value. I do think that, I mean, looking at the numbers, everyone thinks that Diaz is the best. I do think they've all got some slight concerns over them. But I do think a lot of us expect there to be value there. So if Kulusevski is going to get minutes and Saka is going to continue as he always does to be nailed, I do like that going forward. So this is one of those teams that week to week can score a lot of points. He's got a lot of valuable players there that will have high points per match potential. And look, maybe no Salah won't be an issue. I would just worry about game week 2 straight away. Who are you going to captain? But if you get away with it, if you get away with no Salah and no Haaland, these are the type of the team that could be laughing. And one thing to remember as well with how you set your teams up, an early wild card is almost definitely going to happen this year, probably around game week 6 to 8. So even if this doesn't do too well, as long as you don't get too left behind, you'll be wildcarding later on anyway. So overall, really solid, I was going to say squalid, solid squad. The bench is obviously an issue. But other than that, I think if all those players in that team get regular minutes, there's going to be some pretty high scores there. As long as you can nail the captaincy, that would be my big concern. So this style of team is what I would consider roughly the template, right? You've got 1 to 2 £8 million midfielders. You've got the 2 premiums in there, Salah and Haaland, who are super high owned. Trent Alexander-Arnold's in there, as well as quite a few other premium defenders. And then you've got the cheap goalie at 4.5 million in Raya. Worth saying as well, Brentford have signed another keeper. I fully expect Raya to still be the number one. I don't actually think there's any concerns over that at all, unless, again, we find out new information ahead of game week 1. I think you're going to be pretty safe with Raya. I would not start panicking right now. So we say this is kind of the template. One thing I really like about 4 at the back, and I spoke about this on my first draft video, is you get to have that 4.5 million defender. Now, Nico Williams has obviously signed and left Liverpool now, so he will be a £4 million playing defender. But I do think the 4.5 offer such value, you don't necessarily need to go there. So Tomiyasu is a perfectly good first sub. The one issue I would say with the defence, and I guess the reason that the defence is like that is because there's 2 £8 million midfielders here, Luis Diaz and Foden, is you've gone for Walker instead of Cancelo or instead of kind of Reece James or even Robertson or someone like that. Obviously, in this particular draft, you can't have Robertson because you've got Diaz. I do worry a little bit over Walker's minutes because Man City seem to do all their business kind of behind closed doors, and then all of a sudden they just sign the player. There was all that talk about Cucurella. Now, it has kind of died down, at least at the time of recording this video, but I suspect if they want him, they're going to get him, whatever price it takes. And when he comes in, look, he may have his minutes managed as well. We know that if Walker plays on the right, Cancelo can absolutely play on the left. But if we think Cucurella is going to get some minutes at left back, then surely Cancelo is also going to get minutes at right back, and then suddenly Walker is potentially an issue. Now, obviously, if that happens, it means Cucurella has signed, so you could just swap Walker to Cucurella, and that could be a really good sign-in. And then suddenly this team looks maybe a little bit more solid. But there's not really, I mean, because this is the style of team that I will probably go for, there's not too much I dislike about it. You've got those £8 million midfielders. If someone else kind of starts off hot, you can swap to them. One thing I will say about that, though, a lot of people are saying you should start with 1 or 2 £8 million midfielders so that if someone does really well that you don't own, you can just switch. The problem is, if you start with Foden and he doesn't do too well, and Kulusevski gets a brace in game week 1 or something like that, you're going to have to pretty much swap straight away before anywhere near the deadline, because Kulusevski will go up in price, and unless you've saved 0.5 million in the bank or more, you're not going to be able to make that switch for very long, right? So that's the only thing I would consider. The likelihood is, if you want to jump on a new bandwagon, you might have to take a hit here or there over the opening few game weeks anyway. So having that £8 million midfielder is not necessarily like a deal breaker, right? If you don't have 2 or if you don't have 1, but they do look pretty solid. Right now I am favouring Haaland over Kane just for captaincy rotation, although again you could argue, I think it's game week 3 when Spurs have got Wolves at home, that could be the best captain, and the fact that he's great for Southampton at home as well, we shouldn't overlook that. And just really quickly on Jesus, I am favouring him over Saka. I think he will be the guy that scores most of Arsenal's goals this year. He is going to get regular minutes. He has got really good underlying numbers from City. Arteta's worked with him before. There's lots to like about him. I don't think Saka is necessarily much worse than him, but if I had to pick between the two, that's probably where I would go. I mean, with this team, you could go 4-5-1 and have Saka instead, but I think Jesus is the slightly better pick. And if there is a forward, the one thing I like about Jesus as well, he takes up that forward spot. So if there is a forward that you want to swap to, if you had Saka, you might have to make 2 moves to do it. With Jesus, potentially, you could just do it in 1. So I don't think that Saka is so much better than Jesus that we should go for that midfield spot. So I do like Jesus in there as well. I don't want to talk too much about Neto. Look, 5.5 million mids, they are what they are. I think it's a fixtures play, and that's fair enough. So if you want to go for him, do it. I don't think there's necessarily too many more better 5.5 million fielders right now. But yeah, the template is template for a reason. It's pretty solid. It's well set up. Lots of value players, 2 premiums for captaincy. It'll do well at the start of the season. I'm almost sure about that. Okay, so this draft's a little bit different, right? You've got some of the standard players, Jesus, Neto, James, Perisic, Trent Alexander-Arnold, etc. But you've also got Sterling and Fernandes, so both £10 million midfielders, and Darwin Núñez as well up front. I'll come on to those attackers in just a minute and my thoughts around going so different from the off. I'll just start with Trippier. So I know people are expecting a big improvement from Newcastle this year, and I do think we will see that. But I don't really like 2 of the first 5 fixtures for Newcastle, okay? So they've got a pretty good opener against Nottingham Forest, and I think Brighton away from a defensive point of view is okay as well. But game week 3 is Man City, and game week 5 is Liverpool away. Not ideal. I wouldn't expect clean sheets, and I don't think... Trippier is an attacking fullback, and we know he's going to have set pieces, but I sometimes think people talk about him as though he is at the level of Chilwell and James and Trent and players like that, and he's just not. So I don't think you necessarily want to play him in those tough fixtures, right? If you've got Trent or Cancelo or Robertson and they're playing Chelsea away or Man City away, in most cases you probably still play them. I don't think you necessarily want to do that with Trippier. And to have a bench of Colback and Andreas Pereira is not ideal to have to play them ahead of him. So that's just one weakness. I think with Vestergaard, I wouldn't expect him to play. I could be wrong, right? And again, we'll see in pre-season. But I think Fofana and Evans are usually top of the pecking order for centre-backs for Leicester. And you've got Soyuncu there as well. I don't think Vestergaard gets very high up. So if he does play for $4 million, he could be a bargain. But I just don't see it, right? So that's one thing on Trippier. Let's come on to Sterling and Fernandes. We'll start with Sterling. So at the time of recording, he's still at Man City, hence the Man City kit. I think we're all fully expecting him to move to Chelsea, and it probably will happen soon. I do like Chelsea's opening fixtures. The only slight mark against them is 4, I think it's 4 if I just look at this, of the first 7 fixtures that are good. So Everton, Leeds, Southampton and Fulham, they're all away. None of them are at home. The home games are West Ham, Leicester and Spurs, which are all probably a little bit tougher. But I still think they can go and get results in those away games, right? They're one of the best teams in the league. It shouldn't be an issue. And I also have really high hopes for Sterling at Chelsea. I think at Man City, you've got so much quality in attack. So many times you're in and out of the side. That shouldn't happen at Chelsea, right? They have also got a lot of players that can play left or right. Ziyech, Pulisic are there as well. Obviously, Mason Mount can play central and kind of in other positions, but he's going to play most games anyway. But Sterling, I think, is going to almost go in as the main attacker, right? Havertz should play up front. Someone's going to play off the right, unless they sign a new striker, of course, then Havertz might not be in. And even though Werner's there, I think Sterling goes in on that left side and just makes it his own and gets regular minutes. And I think that will really help him. His underlying numbers are always good. He's a good goal threat, good goal scorer as well. I think he's going to be really good there. The only thing about this draft, and again, I'm not sitting here trying to get people to move off what they want to do, right? And I think you have to kind of just think about the type of FPL manager you are. Like for someone like me, I mean, you can call it safe, you can call it risk-free, you can call it boring, but I will go for likes of Salah and Haaland. And as much as Sterling, Fernandes and Núñez might be exciting, I probably just won't go for them from the start. But if you're someone that wants to go a little bit different, and you accept there's a little bit of a gamble there, then you should absolutely just stick to it. So I do think Sterling could do bits. I just think it's going to be difficult for a lot of people to fit him in straight away. With Bruno Fernandes, I really think you are banking on Cristiano Ronaldo not being at the club. Because if Ronaldo is there, he will have penalties. And I'm just not convinced that Fernandes is £2 million better than Diaz or Saka or Kulusevski or Mount. And that $2 million in this team could be spread quite nicely elsewhere. So I know there's potential there with Fernandes because we saw it not last season but the season before. But a lot of that involved penalties. And with Man United, the fixtures are not fantastic to start off. I think if someone like Rashford or Martial was getting regular minutes at the start, you could take a punt on them because the price is nice and low. But I think you want better than Brighton at home, Liverpool home in the opening 3. I mean, as a first 4, Brighton, Brentford and Southampton are probably not that bad. But you throw that Liverpool game in there as well, I think you have to expect quite a lot from a £10 million player. And I'm just not sure it's there with Fernandes. Between the two, unless Ronaldo goes, that might make it closer. I do think Sterling's the better option. So if I was going to downgrade one, it would probably be Fernandes. And then with Darwin Núñez, I think we look at the Community Shield and see what happens. If Klopp goes into that Community Shield game against Man City with Diaz, Núñez, Salah, that spells good things for Núñez, I think, to trust him that early on to see what he's got. Obviously, it's just a friendly, so it's not the league game or whatever, but it will be a good match, and that might show the sign of intent to how many starts he's going to get early on. I know people keep quoting the price tag, but it's not like Jota and Firmino are not going to get minutes, right? So there's still going to be issues there. But if he starts that game against Man City, he could be a shrewd differential. So same kind of caveats as always. Obviously, you're missing Salah. That could be an issue. It is a bit of a gamble. But you have got Haaland there for that Game Week 2 captaincy. And if any of those other kind of less premium but still quite highly priced attackers do well, who knows? You could be off to a good start. Okay, so we had to include a threemium, aka a 3 premium attacker draft in this video because I know quite a few people want to go for it. I think some of it is fear of missing out, right? If you've got Salah and Haaland, then you are pretty scared of what Kane and Son can do, especially in that opening fixture. So I see why people want to go for it. I think a lot of people kind of get almost offended that we're not seeing Son in too many teams, but the reality is he's 12 million now, so we have to compare him to other 12 million options. If he was still 10 million, we probably would find a way to fit him in our teams, but it is just more difficult now, and you have to weigh him up against Salah and Haaland. And I know he got the Golden Boot last year, but I'm just not sure if he can necessarily repeat that, especially without penalties, right? He's a fantastic player, but penalties do really help these other players like Salah, like Kane as well. So it'll be interesting to see how he does. My initial instinct is maybe it might be easier to actually fit Kane in instead of Son if you're going 3 premium, just to have that 0.5 million to spend elsewhere. Because in defence, for example, I'm not sure, like, there's some good £5 million defenders, but there's much better options at 5.5 and above. Like Matt Cash, I'm not completely convinced about early on. Romero, definitely not. I think the problem with him, I see him as a player that can always get a yellow card and doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of goal threat compared to a lot of other players. If Doherty is starting the season for Spurs, then that is an obvious swap, right? Romero to Doherty, but that might not be the case. You might need that 0.5 million to go, you know, up from there to someone like Perisic instead. The big standout issue is you've got Rothwell in the middle. Look, maybe he'll be great. I don't really know too much about it if I'm honest, but there's no one on the bench that you can play instead, so you're having to play him week in, week out. And again, I don't necessarily mind having a 5.5 million mid that you have to play that enables the rest of the team. I just question whether it's worth all these sacrifices to go to 3 premiums, basically. Right? I'm not really a fan of it, and I'm going to show you why in a second. Cucurella, obviously, if he goes to Man City, is a much better option. I don't think he breaks FPL, but I think we will see him in a lot of teams so that people can spend more in attack. So I like him as an option, and you've still got Trent, you've got James, and a 4.5 million keeper is perfectly acceptable. Now, I am pretty much probably just going to make this back to a kind of template team, right? So this is that team I was just showing there. So let's just say that Son is the sacrificial lamb here that we're going to sell, and we don't want to take him down too much, right? But I just want to show you how different the team, like, basically that sacrifice to have Son is probably just not worth it. Captains, the thing with value is the likes of Salah, Haaland and Son, they're valuable because of captaincy. You can only captain one of them every week. So to hold all 3, you kind of need them from the opening 3 to 4 weeks to be hitting 10 points a game. And it's just probably not going to happen, right? So let's put in the player that everyone really likes at the moment, which is Luis Diaz. So suddenly you've got 4 million extra to spend. So you don't need all these £5 million players. Let's keep Cucurella in there and just assume that he goes to Man City. We'll put Perisic in. Now we've got that little bit extra to spend as well. He's right at the bottom. And then Cash will upgrade to, let's just go for a Chelsea defender. We won't even go too high up. We'll just go for Chilwell as well as James. So we've still got 2.5 to spend. And the team looks like this so far. So I'm looking at that. And you've still got Rothwell. We'll come to him in a minute. I'm looking at that and comparing it to this team here. So I just think it already... Like, I don't feel like going Diaz instead of Son makes it a huge amount weaker. Son is definitely the best option, of course. But if Luis Diaz does get a few starts at the start of the season, it could be gold. And then you have all this extra money to spend. And obviously your big issue is Rothwell. You don't even have to spend all 7.5, right? This is a big if, right? But if, for example, Rashford is starting the season, you could put him in, and then you got 1 million to spend. That could be Murphy up to a 5.5 million pound midfielder. Let's just go for Gordon instead of the obvious Neto right now. You don't necessarily have to be playing these players week in, week out. They can just be bench options as well. So now you've got Chilwell instead of Cash, you've got Perisic instead of Romero, you've got Luis Diaz instead of Son. You're still going to be captain Salah and Haaland anyway, because it's a pretty good rotation. You're not necessarily going to miss out on that Spurs captaincy. And then you have got Gordon or whichever 5.5 or 5. If you really want Rothwell, you could keep him and have another 0.5 to spend. And in fixtures where, you know, Rashford's playing Liverpool, which I think is game week 3, well, Gordon's got Nottingham Forest, so you bench Rashford and play Gordon, or whichever 5.5 million mid you want it to be. So I don't know. I mean, there's probably better ways you can spread that cash around. I'm just doing this on the fly, really. But I just think that 3 premium looks good when they're all doing really well. And we saw that last year with Ronaldo, Lukaku and Salah. When they're all scoring kind of braces every week, it looks brilliant. But as soon as that stops, you lose track to everyone else that's just got more valuable players. So when you're making a team, value players are really key up until a point. At some point, you have to spend the budget. You need to get good captains in, like Salah, like Haaland, like Son. But you don't need all 3. You can only captain 1 each week. So look, again, if you want to go for it, absolutely go for it. I just think there's quite a few cons with it, which is why I don't particularly like it. So there we go. I think we got through quite a good few talking points across those different drafts. If you did find it entertaining or useful, please do give it a like. And obviously hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. Let's hit 300,000 subscribers before game week 1. That would be amazing. Obviously, I couldn't get to all 1,200 drafts, but I do appreciate everyone sending me one in. I will do this again in a few weeks, because obviously, like on that last draft, where I'm putting in like Rashford or Gordon or Neto on the bench, there might be more players that we're kind of interested in a couple of weeks when we've seen a few pre-season games, a few more transfers and stuff like that. So at 6.5 million, you've got Rashford. You could go 0.5 less for Martinelli. You could go for Odegaard, who could get quite a few minutes. There's Sinisterra, who I've probably pronounced wrong, at Leeds as well. Let's see how he does. Harrison is only 6 million as well. So there's plenty of other options that we can talk about, but I just wanted to show you what you can do with that money without that 3 premium. You know, the gamble you take if you go for Fernandes, Sterling and Darwin Núñez from the off, right? If it doesn't work, well, that kind of sucks, and maybe you get left behind. If it does, maybe you're ahead. So it's what kind of FPL manager you are. Anyway, I'll leave it there. If you have enjoyed it, please do give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.